It's time for Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, inviting the atheist, agnostic, and skeptic to examine for themselves the evidence for the Christian faith. We are all limited by what we do not know and by the things we think we know but are not true. Dr. Joe Mott earned his PhD at LSU and was a distinguished math professor at Florida State University for 38 years, helping to write 3 math textbooks and authoring over 30 research articles in math. He is now the host of this radio program, Defending and Commending the Faith. Here is Joe Mott.
Hello to everyone. Welcome to the program. Followers of Christ are still being called into action for defending and commending the Christian faith. Charles Darwin's 1859 book, Origin of Species, produced a revolution in human thinking, perhaps more profound in science than anything before or since. The 16th century Copernican revolution removed the Earth from its privileged position at the center of the universe, but the Darwinian theory removed God from his privileged position as the creator of the universe and of all life, most notably of human life. We are asked to believe that, first, a tiny bacterium had come from non-living matter, and then, second, that it has evolved into 1.7 million highly complex species. The evidence supporting evolution would have to span a very large gap between non-life and human life. Is the evidence strong enough? I am trying to show that it does not. Darwin himself pointed out there are 37 problems with his theory, problems with which science is still struggling today. Now, thanks to the scientific work of Albert Einstein and other scientists, the beginning of the universe has been confirmed. That proves that a beginner, a creator, exists. Thanks to space probes and high-powered telescopes, we can determine the age of the universe to be about 13.7 or 13.8 billion years old. General relativity has been confirmed also. New light has been shed on DNA, RNA, and the development of proteins, revealing vast complexity that seems to demonstrate elements of design. Thanks to the breakthroughs in biochemistry, scientists have mapped the 3.5 billion nucleotide base pairs of human DNA. Where did the information come from to determine what the DNA is to do? Why do evolutionists consistently avoid the mathematics of neo-Darwinian evolution? Were they basing their theories on observational guesses, or was there hard evidence to back them up? Dr. Lee Spatner, an American and Israeli creationist author, mechanical engineer, applied biophysicist, and physicist, commented on Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, saying, "Dawkins talked about chance, but he didn't calculate the chance of anything, nor did he cite anyone who did. He just assumed that cumulative selection could lead to macroevolution. He assumed what I have shown to be impossible." Dawkins said, without justification, each successive change in the gradual evolutionary process was simple enough, relative to its predecessor, to have arisen by chance. However, evolutionists seem to think that such mathematical calculations are unnecessary The University of California professor Richard Goldsmith writes in the 1952 volume of the journal American Scientist, evolution of the animal and plant world is considered by all those entitled to judgment to be a fact for which no further proof is needed. Yet, evidence for intelligent design was based on the hard sciences of physics, molecular biology, mathematics, and statistics. If there is design, then there is a designer. This should give evolutionists reason to contemplate that their theory will crack under the weight of critical review. What does a long bridge stretched over a deep canyon have in common with the idea of Darwinian evolution and the thinking of those who oppose evolution? Both span a vast chasm. Both offer a possible means of getting from one side to the other, and both require a number of things to work correctly if a successful crossing is to be made. For the bridge for traffic over the canyon, it is obvious about those three things. For evolution, the chasm is understanding how species originate, the means how one species can lead to another species, and the mechanisms, natural selection, random mutations, and abiogenesis, that have to work correctly in order for what is claimed to really occur. The transfer of one species to another has never been observed, and how life came from non-life is still a mystery. It seems to me that the bridge of evolution is a failure. Let's carry the analogy a bit further. In the case of a real bridge for auto traffic, everything from beams to girders to the bolts must be strong or the bridge can fall due to a heavy load. Failure of one major component points to the possibility of an eventual disaster. In the case of evolution, the entire sequence of evidence must be strong, or Darwin's theory will fall apart. One broken element in the evolutionary span is all it takes for the theory to be a failure. I quoted Dr. Ralph Muncaster in the last episode. He is a former skeptic of the Bible, but is now the founder and executive director of the Institute of Contemporary Christian Faith, a frequent lecturer at colleges and churches, and author of several books, including A Skeptic's Search for God, Dismantling Evolution, and the Examine the Evidence series of belief-building booklets. As Muncaster continued his research into Darwinian evolution, he found not just one weak beam, girder, or a problem with one section of the theory, but he found damaged parts throughout. In fact, he couldn't identify a single section that he considered strong. But notice that Darwin himself identified 37 problems that needed to be defended. Allow me to introduce some key elements of evidence against Darwinian evolution, even though it is still almost universally accepted in the public mind. First, Darwinianism advocates spontaneous generation, but that theory was refuted by Francisco Redi, John Needham, and Louis Pasteur. That's one element of evidence that shows Darwinian evolution is false. Second, if living things had really evolved from other kinds of creature, as Darwin claims, then one would think that the fossil record should show many intermediate or transitional forms with some sort of halfway structures. But the transitional links are missing from the fossil record. That's the second element of evidence against Darwinian evolution. Third, hooking amino acids together in a chain to form a protein requires removing a molecule of water from each amino acid added to the chain. But amino acids dissolve in water. The Miller-Urey experiment falsely led people to think we could create life in a test tube because it could create the building blocks of life. This is extremely misleading. First, these building blocks of life produced only a few amino acids, very far from the complex proteins, nucleotides, and organized information necessary for life. Second, the Miller-Urey experiment's simulation of the early Earth's environment has been widely criticized. They artificially blocked out oxygen and collected only the amino acids that were favorable to life. The implication is that they did not collect what was unfavorable to life, though that is an inference and so not certain. Third, it is almost never mentioned that the vast majority of components of what was produced was mostly destructive tar, which is not beneficial to life. In fact, the tar would have eliminated any vestiges of early life. Yet the myth of what the Miller-Urey experiment produced is still in many school textbooks, completely overlooking the problems with this experiment. That practice has misled people to think that science has created life in the laboratory. Let me point out that although water is a necessary part of the Miller-Urey experiment, the presence of water actually prevents amino acids from forming into proteins. Even if we were to accept the highly unlikely position that all life-specific amino acids were randomly generated by such experiments, how far does this take us towards random developments of life itself? In other words, this would be a far cry from creating all of the materials necessary for life and overcoming all the arrangements of the human genome of 3.5 billion base pairs of DNA. But this type of adaptation is microevolution. We know this has been practiced in breeding and is accepted by virtually everyone. This kind of change occurs within a species, but evolutionists claim that natural selection can produce change between species. That is macroevolution. That assumption has absolutely no supporting evidence. Isn't this similar to the development of a small drop of black ink and claiming that over time you have produced the building blocks of an encyclopedia? Or that a random generator that can type will over time produce Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet? I think evolutionists think natural selection has an intelligent mind and is capable of creating life. Cliff Neckley on YouTube says evolution is based on small steps of adaptation. And he adds that evolution has no creative mechanism at all, only adaptation. This is the third element of evidence against Darwinian evolution. Fourth, the medical doctor Jeffrey Simmons writes in his book Millions of Missing Links that the argument supporting the theory of evolution is shaky at best. While nearly every aspect of science is compatible with intelligent design, he adds, modern scientific studies have not made evolution more believable, they have made it less believable. He continues, based on the scientific method and the more than 1 billion missing transitional links and counting, one might argue that evolution no longer rises to the level of being a theory. Instead, it should be considered at most a hypothesis, or perhaps just a proposal of historical importance. That's 4 elements of evidence against Darwinian evolution. Allow me to close this episode by reminding you, exercise daily. Walk with God.
Thank you for listening to Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, a production of Wave 94 Radio in Tallahassee, Florida. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, please forward them to Doug Apple at Wave94 at this email address, dougapple@wave94.com. And be sure to join us every Monday evening at 6:45 p.m. on Wave 94 and subscribe through your favorite podcast app. Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott.